Platform 7 at Pittsburgh's Amtrak station smells like diesel and old coffee and something metallic that I could never quite name, even after a year and a half of standing on it almost every Tuesday evening at 6:47. I know that platform the way you know a habit you are not proud of. The cracked grout line near the third bench. The overhead speaker that always cuts out on the last syllable of Harrisburg. The particular slant of the evening light in October that makes the rails look like they are made of copper instead of steel. I was 34 years old and I was a high school music teacher, and I had spent 11 years learning to read rooms full of restless teenagers who did not want to be where they were. I thought that made me perceptive. I thought I noticed things. I did not notice I had walked onto the wrong platform. What I noticed was the weight of my right hand, specifically the absence of weight on my left. I had worn that ring for 14 months, and the groove it had worn into my finger was still there, faint and pink, like a tide mark after the water recedes. I had placed the ring on the kitchen counter at 2:30 that afternoon, slid it across the laminate without a word because there were no words left, and then driven 40 minutes to Pittsburgh in a car that felt enormous around me. I had a bag with 2 days of clothes. I had a ceramic travel mug with a chipped rim that I held with both hands even when it was empty, which it was. I had a ticket to Harrisburg, where my sister lived in a house with a guest room and a dog named Pepper who did not require explanations. The 647 was already moving when I reached the platform. There was another train. The doors were open. A conductor in a navy jacket gestured with a kind of tired patience, and I climbed on, and the doors closed behind me, and I found my seat 14C beside a window streaked with old rain. And I pressed my right thumb into the chipped rim of my empty mug and watched the lights of Pittsburgh fall away. I had no idea where I was going. That part turned out to be the most important thing about that night. The train smelled like burned coffee and industrial upholstery and something faintly metallic, the way all trains do, and I had ridden enough of them that the smell alone was usually enough to settle something in my chest. It did not settle anything that night. I pressed my thumb harder into the mug's chipped rim, that one rough edge I had never gotten around to filing smooth, and I watched my own reflection float above the passing lights. The Harrisburg line out of Pittsburgh runs northeast. I had taken it 41 times. I know because I used to count, back when I was still the kind of person who kept a running tally of small, reassuring facts. 41 Tuesdays, almost always the 647, almost always seat 13 or 14 on the left-hand side, watching the Allegheny River show itself through the trees before the train curved away and started climbing into the quiet hills toward Greensburg and Latrobe. I knew that stretch of dark water by heart. I knew the exact moment it disappeared. It did not appear. I kept waiting for it. There was a gas station wide and bright that I did not recognize. There was an overpass I had never noticed before. There was a long, flat reach of commercial buildings, low and dark and unfamiliar, and the lights of some small municipality arranged themselves in a grid that was entirely wrong for the geography I had memorized without meaning to. I pressed my thumb around and around the mug's chipped rim and waited for the river, and the river did not come. I told myself I had simply not been paying attention. That grief, or whatever the blunted feeling inside me was, had softened my perception, made me unreliable. I told myself the river had come and gone while I was looking at my own reflection, and not at the actual world, which was probably true of a great deal more than just that night. Then the man in the seat beside me shifted slightly, and I became aware of him in the particular, sudden way you become aware of a sound that has actually been present for several minutes. The refrigerator hum, the rain on glass. He was not looking at me. He was looking forward, and he had a clipboard resting face down across his knees, and his jacket was dark blue, work-worn at the cuffs, and his hands were still in his lap. He was not reading. He was not on his phone. He was simply present in his seat, the way a person is present when they are used to long distances, and have made a kind of peace with them. What he said very quietly and without turning his head was this: "You've been doing that for about 20 minutes. I looked down at my own hand. My thumb was moving in slow circles around the chipped rim of the mug, pressing and releasing, a habit so automatic I had not felt it happening. I stopped. He still did not look at me. There was nothing intrusive in it. He was simply stating a thing he had observed, the way you might tell a person their coat had fallen off the seat, because it seemed useful for them to know. Outside the window, a water tower I had never seen before slid past against the dark sky. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked back at my thumb, and at the mug, and at the window, and understood with a slow and almost quiet certainty that I was not on the train to Harrisburg. The man beside me cleared his throat, not loudly, just enough. "Cleveland," he said. "This train goes to Cleveland." I waited for the panic to arrive. I waited for the lurch in the chest, the scramble for my phone, the mental arithmetic of connections and missed calls and explanations owed to no one in particular. I waited for some version of myself that would grip the armrest and flag down a conductor and treat this as the emergency it technically was. None of that came. What came instead was something closer to the feeling you get when you have been holding a heavy bag for so long that you stopped noticing the weight, and then someone simply takes it from you. Not relief exactly, more like the sudden awareness of your own arm. "Okay," I said. He looked at me then, for the first time. Not a long look. Just enough to check something, the way a person might glance at a gauge just to confirm the reading was what they thought it was. "Okay," he repeated, and there was no judgment in it. No question either. Not yet. He let the words sit there between us and turned back to his clipboard, which he had rested face down against his knee the moment he spoke. I put my mug on the tray table in front of me. My thumb had gone still. "I should have been on the 6:47, I said, "to Harrisburg." "You missed it by about 4 minutes, he said. 6:47 pulls from platform 4. You came down to 7. I thought about that. Platform 4 was where I always stood. Every Tuesday for a year and a half, I had stood in exactly the same spot on platform 4 and counted the yellow line under my feet and watched the board. Tonight, I had not watched the board. Tonight, I had walked down to the first train with its doors open and gotten on it the way you step out of the way of something moving toward you, not choosing a direction so much as simply getting clear. I was not paying attention, I said. "No," he agreed, and again there was nothing cutting in it. He said it the way you acknowledge weather. It had rained. I had not been paying attention. These were simply the conditions. I looked out the window. We were moving through a stretch of low industrial buildings with their loading docks all dark. The kind of landscape that exists in the same form in every Midwestern city, anonymous and workmanlike and lit by a particular orange that only sodium lamps make. It was not the landscape outside the Harrisburg train. I knew the Harrisburg corridor the way you know a road you have driven sick and tired and half asleep. I knew every overpass and every tree line between Pittsburgh and the Susquehanna. This was not any of it. "Is there a connection from Cleveland?" I asked. "Back to Harrisburg?" "There is," he said. "Not until morning. There is a 9:17 if you want to try Columbus first, but that puts you in around 2. 2 in the morning. I almost laughed. I pressed my lips together instead. "I do not actually need to be in Harrisburg tonight," I said. He nodded once as though this explained something he had already suspected. "Then you are fine," he said. And the strange thing, the thing I could not account for and would not fully understand until much later, was that sitting in seat 14C on a train going entirely the wrong direction, I thought he might be right. The train settled into its rhythm again, the sound of it low and even beneath us, like something breathing in a deep and untroubled sleep. Outside the window, the last orange rind of Pittsburgh's skyline had disappeared, and there was nothing now but the dark shape of hills and the occasional smear of a farmhouse light moving past and gone. I wrapped both hands around my travel mug, though the tea inside it had gone cold a good half-hour ago. He did not try to fill the quiet. That was the first thing I noticed about him. The real first thing, before I had language for it. Most people, when a silence opens up beside them on a train, will reach for something, a phone, a book, a remark about the weather through the glass. He did none of that. He had a clipboard face down on his knee, and he sat with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to be patient in a professional sense. Patience not as a personality trait, but as a trained and practiced tool. I found it disarming in a way I could not immediately explain. "Do you make this run often?" I asked. "Often enough," he said. "A few times a month, give or take. It depends on the schedule." "What is it you are inspecting exactly?" He gave a short, almost private smile. "That is a longer answer than it sounds." "I have until Cleveland," I said, and something in that made him look at me sideways, not intrusively, just acknowledging. "Fair enough," he said. "The short version is track integrity, bridge ratings, signal infrastructure, the condition of things people trust without thinking about." I turned that over in my mind. The condition of things people trust without thinking about. I thought about how many times I had stepped onto a train platform and simply assumed the rails beneath it were sound. "That sounds like a lot of responsibility," I said. "It is ordinary responsibility," he said. "It just looks invisible until something goes wrong." I understood that more than I was prepared to say. The mug in my hands had a chip along the rim, a small notch I had worried at with my thumbnail for so long. The ceramic there was almost smooth. I had chipped it moving into the apartment on Ellsworth Avenue 2.5 years ago. I remembered wrapping it in a dish towel and being too rushed to be careful. I had kept using it anyway because I liked the weight of it. "You have had a long day," Declan said. It was not a question. "Is it that obvious?" "No," he said, and he said it in a way that meant he was being accurate rather than kind. "But you have not stopped moving your thumb around that mug since you sat down." I looked at my hand. He was right. I had not been aware I was doing it. I set the mug down in the cup holder on the armrest and folded my hands in my lap and felt briefly exposed in the way you feel when someone names a habit you did not know you had. "It was a long day," I said. He nodded. I had not planned to say anything else. I am by temperament a private person. I do not talk to strangers on trains. I teach teenagers to read music notation. I attend department meetings. I cook dinner for one and I go to bed and I get up and I do it again. And I carry the ordinary architecture of my life in an orderly way without requiring an audience for it. That is who I was. That is who I had been for a long time. But there was something about the particular way he had looked at my hand. Not with pity, not with curiosity that wanted feeding, just with a straightforward, unhurried noticing. As though he saw things because it was his job to see them, and found nothing in what he saw that required comment or correction. I said, "I had to return something today, something I had been holding on to for a while." He waited. "It was the right thing to do," I said. "I am certain of that." "But," he said. Not a question. Just the word offered back to me as a space. "But," I agreed. And outside the window, the dark countryside moved past, indifferent and enormous and oddly comforting, the way large and indifferent things sometimes are. We sat like that for a while, not filling the quiet, which was itself a kind of relief. I had spent so many months in a relationship where silence was a problem to be solved, a symptom to be diagnosed, a gap that someone, usually me, was expected to bridge. This quiet between Declan and me was different. It had a floor to it. It held weight without buckling. I was looking at his hands when I noticed the watch. It sat on his left wrist, a plain steel case thing with a round face and a brown leather strap that had softened and curved from years of wear. Ordinary in every way except for the crystal, which was cracked. Not chipped at the edge the way something gets from a careless knock. Cracked all the way across. A single clean fracture running from roughly 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock, bisecting the dial like a horizon line. "Your watch is broken," I said. He looked down at it the way you look at something you stopped seeing long ago. "The crystal is," he said. "The movement is fine." "Have you had it fixed?" He was quiet for a moment. He turned his wrist slightly, and I could see the second hand still moving in its small, steady circuit beneath the cracked glass, faithful and unhurried. "It belonged to my father," he said. "He was a dispatcher out of Connellsville for 22 years. There was a derailment one winter, nothing catastrophic. 3 cars off the rails on a secondary line, no injuries, but my father was on duty and took it hard the way dispatchers sometimes do, even when everything ends without anyone getting hurt. He was wearing this watch when it happened. Caught it on a filing cabinet drawer in the dispatch room. Cracked the crystal clean through." He paused. Outside, the dark fields were interrupted briefly by the lights of a small town, a grain elevator, a water tower with a name I could not read fast enough, and then darkness again. "He could have replaced it," I said. "Easily. He said the same thing every time someone pointed it out. He kept meaning to, but the watch still ran perfectly, still told the right time. He said it seemed ungrateful to retire a thing just because it looked damaged when it was still doing its job exactly right." I felt something move in my chest, not dramatically. The way furniture settles in an old house, a small sound, a slight shift, and then stillness again. Except that something that had been slightly wrong is now, almost imperceptibly, more level. "He wore it until he died," Declan said. 12 years with a cracked crystal. I've had it for 6. I looked at my own hands in my lap. My left hand. The base of my ring finger, where there was now nothing, not even the impression yet. The skin still smooth and unmarked because I had only been wearing it for 14 months. And some things do not leave a trace as quickly as you expect them to. "I returned an engagement ring today," I said. I had not planned to say it. It came out the way things come out when you have been holding them a long time and the precise right moment of gravity occurs, and the holding simply stops. Declan did not say he was sorry. He did not say that it was brave, or that it was for the best, or ask me what happened. He did what he had been doing since the moment I had boarded this train by mistake and sat down beside him in the dark. He simply received the information and gave it the room it needed and let it be exactly the size it actually was. 14 months, I said. He nodded once. "Were you wearing it when you got on the train tonight?" "No," I said. I had already given it back. He looked at the watch on his wrist for a moment, at that clean, cracked line across the face of it, and then he looked back out at the dark countryside, and I had the strange and specific feeling of something inside me still running perfectly even so. The train moved into the dark without ceremony. One moment there were the scattered lights of a town, a water tower, a lit parking lot behind a fence, and then there was nothing. Just the window and the black land beyond it moving at speed, and the faint ghost of my own reflection looking back at me. I did not mind it. That surprised me a little because I had spent the last several hours minding everything. The fluorescence of the station, the weight of the ring box in my coat pocket before I finally set it on Nathan's kitchen counter, the sound the door had made when I pulled it shut behind me, which was just a door sound, an ordinary domestic click, and which had somehow carried the weight of everything I had not been able to say out loud in 14 months. But this dark, I did not mind. Declan had shifted slightly in his seat, not toward me, not away, just into a more settled position, the kind a person finds when they are prepared to stay somewhere for a while. His inspection clipboard was still face down against his knee. The train car around us had grown quieter as we pushed further from the last stop. 2 rows ahead, someone had turned off their reading light. A child near the front had finally stopped asking questions and gone to sleep against a window, one small sneaker pressed flat against the seat back in front of them. I watched all of it, the way you watch things when your mind has been emptied out and what is left is just attention, clean and directionless. At some point, Declan reached into the bag at his feet and came up with a small thermos. He unscrewed the lid and the smell of black coffee moved between us, sharp and particular. He poured a careful measure into the lid cup and set it on the tray table in front of me without asking. Not presuming, just offering. The way you set a glass of water in front of someone and let them decide. I wrapped both hands around it, The warmth came through immediately. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it in several directions at once. He poured what remained in the thermos into his own cup and drank it plain, his eyes back on the dark window. There is a kind of silence that is a form of consideration. I had forgotten that. I had spent so long in a house where silence meant withdrawal, where a quiet room meant something was being withheld or processed or held against me, that I had stopped being able to read the neutral kind, the just sitting here kind, the kind where two people are simply occupying the same space and finding it sufficient. I thought about Nathan's face when I had set the box down. He had not been cruel about it. That was almost the hardest part. He had been reasonable, measured, the way he was about most things. And I had understood in that moment that I had confused reasonableness with kindness for a very long time. Outside the window, the dark countryside continued, a tree line visible only as a slightly deeper dark against the sky. A farm somewhere set back from the tracks, a single yellow square of light in an upper window, someone awake at this hour for reasons I would never know. I kept my hands around the thermos lid. The coffee was strong and slightly bitter and exactly right. I did not say anything, and neither did Declan, and the train carried us forward, and for the first time since I had walked out of that house, my chest felt like something I could breathe inside of again. The clipboard had been face down in his lap since somewhere around Youngstown, and I had been aware of it the way you become aware of something at the edge of a room that you keep choosing not to look at directly. I looked at it now. It was a standard aluminum clipboard, the kind with a metal spring clip at the top, and he had it turned over like he was hiding a test score. He had not written anything on it in at least an hour. I had noticed that too, the way you notice small things about a person once you have stopped performing the business of being a stranger around them. "What is actually on that clipboard?" I said. He glanced down at it like he had forgotten it was there, which I did not believe for a second. "Inspection forms," he said. "Inspection forms for what?" He shifted in his seat. Not uncomfortable exactly. More like a man deciding how much of something to explain. "Track geometry, ride quality. I log mileposts when something in the car's movement tells me there might be an issue with the rail bed underneath. Super elevation on the curves, cross-level variance, lateral drift." He paused. "I can feel it through the floor." I looked at the floor of the train car, gray industrial carpet, slightly worn along the aisle. I had walked on it without thinking once about what was beneath it. "You can feel rail problems through the floor of a passenger car," I said. "You learn what normal feels like," he said. "And then anything that isn't normal registers. It's like, you know when a piano is slightly out of tune, even if you can't immediately name which key it is? I was a music teacher. I knew exactly what that felt like. I told him so. Something in his face settled. He turned the clipboard over. The top form was a simple grid, milepost numbers running down the left column, a series of shorthand notations I could not read in the low light of the car, and several blank lines still waiting. "So right now," I said, "while we have been sitting here talking, you have also been listening to the train." "Partly," he said. "Also watching the window. The way the horizon line shifts through a curve tells you about super elevation. The way light vibrates on a surface inside the car tells you about lateral movement." He glanced at the window briefly, then back at me. "There's a soft spot in the rail bed about 4 miles back. I noted the milepost. A crew will go out and look at it within the week." I turned that over in my mind. A soft spot in the ground beneath the tracks, invisible from above. Invisible to every passenger who had ever ridden over it without once suspecting. And this man had felt it through his feet in the dark and would make sure someone came to fix it before it became something worse. "How long does it take?" I asked, "to learn to feel it like that?" "About 3 years before you trust what you're feeling," he said. "Another 2 before you stop second-guessing it." 5 years. 5 years of paying close attention to the same thing, until the thing itself started to talk back. I had been playing piano since I was 7 years old, and I still sometimes thought that was what learning actually meant. Not mastery, just the long, patient work of listening until the instrument told you what it needed. I looked at the clipboard resting open in his hands now, at the column of mileposts, at the blank line still waiting for whatever the rest of this route had left to say. "What does this stretch feel like?" I said, meaning the dark countryside we were still moving through. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Solid. This part is solid." I turned back to the window. I believed him. The lights outside had begun to change. Not the full dark of open farmland anymore, but a different kind of dark, punctured here and there by the orange-yellow smear of a highway interchange, a cluster of warehouse lights sitting low on a flat horizon, the suggestion of a city organizing itself at a distance. I had ridden enough night trains to know what that looked like. Cleveland was close. I could feel the particular mathematics of arrival beginning, the way a train seems to collect itself before a station. A subtle steadying, a slight drop in a forward lean. I did not want to arrive. That surprised me enough that I said it out loud, quietly, more to the window than to Declan. "I am not ready for this train to stop." He did not answer right away. He never answered right away, I had noticed that, and I had stopped filling the pauses because they did not feel like absence. They felt like the space where he was actually thinking about what I had said rather than loading his next sentence. "Which train do you usually take on Tuesdays?" he said. It was an odd question coming from nowhere like that. "The 6:47, I said. "To Harrisburg. I've been taking it since January of last year. My mother lives just outside the city." He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that means someone is doing something careful with information. "I was on that train," he said. I turned to look at him. "Not tonight. I was assigned to the 6:47 on Tuesday evenings. I've been running that route since February." He paused. "A colleague called out sick this afternoon, last minute. I switched to cover this one." I heard the words. I arranged them in order. I sat with them for a moment, and then I let them rearrange themselves. February. 17 months of Tuesday evenings, give or take. My bag in the overhead rack on car 7. Always car 7 because the outlet worked reliably by seat 14. The particular hush of that train after Greensburg, the way it cleared out and went quiet by the time the hills started. I had sat in that car for 17 months of Tuesday evenings, riding out to spend time with my mother and riding back the same night because I had school the next morning, and Daniel had never once offered to come along, and I had stopped asking after the third or fourth time. 17 months of Tuesday evenings, and this man had been walking the length of that train in the other direction, clipboard face down, watching for the things that could go wrong, making sure the whole apparatus held together long enough to carry everyone safely home. We had never been in the same car at the same moment. We had been separated by the length of a train for a year and a half, and tonight I had walked through the wrong gate in a daze, carrying the ghost weight of a ring I had given back, and I had sat down in seat 14C on the wrong train, and here was the person I had been that close to for 17 months, sitting at my left elbow with a cracked watch and an open clipboard, and that particular quality of attention I had been missing without knowing it had a name. My hands were in my lap. I looked down at them. They were very still. I was not a person who went still easily. I talked when I was nervous. I hummed without meaning to. I found something to do with my hands. My students knew this about me. Daniel had found it irritating after the first year. But right now, I was as still as I had ever been on a moving train, watching the lights of Cleveland gather themselves into a skyline through the window, and I could feel something shifting in the part of me that had been braced against impact for so long, it had forgotten any other position. Not all wrong turns were wrong. That was the thing I was sitting with. Sometimes the train you boarded by mistake was the only way to arrive at the place you had been trying to reach all along, and you would never have found it on the route you knew by heart. The skyline thickened. Street lights began to outnumber the dark spaces between them, and the train started its slow hydraulic lean into the curve that I would later learn was the approach to Cleveland lakefront. I had never been to Cleveland. I had driven past it once on a family trip when I was 9 years old, and my father had pointed at the lake and said something about the water looking like the sea if you stood close enough. I had not thought about that in 25 years. The platform appeared out of the orange-lit dark the way platforms do, gradually and then all at once. Declan shifted slightly, capping his pen, and I watched him slide the clipboard into his bag with the same quiet efficiency I had been watching all evening. Everything in its place. Nothing hurried, nothing wasted. He checked his watch. The cracked crystal caught the platform lights and scattered them. "Cleveland," he said. Not to me exactly. Just into the air between us, the way you say a word to confirm it is still the right word. "Cleveland," I agreed. The train settled into stillness with a long exhale of brakes. Around us, people were pulling bags from overhead, talking on phones, moving with the ordinary urgency of people who had somewhere already decided to be. I did not move. Declan did not move. A woman with a rolling suitcase squeezed past our row, and I pulled my knees sideways to let her through. And when I straightened back up, the car was nearly empty, and the two of us were still sitting there, in seat 14C and 14D, as though the train had not arrived anywhere at all. "You'll need to check the board," Declan said. "For your connection. The customer service desk at the far end of the concourse can rebook your ticket without a fee if you explain what happened." "I know," I said. I did not move. He turned his head and looked at me for a moment. Not with pity. Not with the careful, practiced sympathy that people deploy when they sense a situation they would rather not be responsible for. He looked at me the way he had looked at everything all evening, with a steadiness that seemed to come from somewhere structural in him, something load-bearing. "There's a place in the station," he said. "They do a decent cup of tea, nothing exceptional, but it's hot and the tables are quiet this time of night." He was not asking exactly. He was not asking. I looked down at my travel mug, long cold, the ceramic rim chipped in the same spot my thumb had been finding all evening without my permission. I thought about the ring I had left on a glass counter at 3:45 that afternoon. I thought about how far away that felt, like something that had happened in a different year on a different woman's hand. "Yes," I said. One word, and something in my chest, which had been held at a particular careful angle for a very long time, finally moved. 7 months is not a long time. It is not enough time to forget the particular weight of a ring you wore for 11 months, or the way silence in a shared apartment can feel louder than any argument. But 7 months is long enough to start recognizing your own face in the mirror again. Long enough to remember that you were, before everything else, someone who loved music for reasons that had nothing to do with anyone's approval. I was back at Millbrook Secondary by September, standing in front of 31 ninth graders with a baton in one hand, and a mounting belief that the second chair viola was intentionally dragging the tempo. I had repainted my kitchen a color I chose alone, a deep and unfashionable green that I liked every single morning. I had ridden the Harrisburg line on a Tuesday evening, and looked out at the familiar dark stretch of the Allegheny corridor, and felt for the first time simply like a woman on a train going where she meant to go. Declan and I had been careful with each other. Careful in the good way, the way you are careful with something you actually want to keep intact. We had taken 3 other trains together by then, 2 of them going nowhere purposeful, which was, I had come to understand, entirely his idea of a good time. It was a Saturday in late February when I heard the knock. Early morning, gray light coming flat through the kitchen window, the green walls holding it. I opened the door, and he was standing on my front step with his coat collar up against the cold, and that watch on his wrist, the cracked crystal catching the pale light the way it always did. A small and honest fracture that still told the right time. He held out 2 train tickets, paper ones, printed at a counter. I could see they were stamped with a departure time but no destination. The line where you fill in where you are going had been left blank. "I thought," he said, and then he stopped, and his mouth did the thing it did when he was choosing his words with the same care he gave a rail inspection. "I thought you might want to decide that part yourself." I took the tickets from his hand. I had boarded the wrong train once by accident in the dark on the worst afternoon of a recent year. It turned out to be exactly the right one.